You can make the argument that to not have tattoos is part of the Old Testament. And so as Christians, we are not bound by the Old Testament. And so it is okay for a Christian to have a tattoo. Some even go as far as to make the argument where Christ in Revelation is spoken of as coming down on a horse. And he has the title King of Kings and Lord of Lords written on his thigh. And that's a tattoo. So our Master Yeshua has a tattoo. So we should be able to have tattoos also, right? Now, like I say, it's a good argument. But understand that mentioning of Christ having the writing of King of Kings and Lord of Lords on his thigh is not literal. I've made mention of this many times before, that the book of Revelation, most of the things in Revelation are not to be taken literal. Christ is not flesh. So he doesn't have a tattoo on his flesh because he is not flesh. That's one. Two, the reason why it's saying he has that written on his thigh, understand that Christ does not have a literal thigh in heaven. There aren't literal seats in heaven that they sit on. God is not literally on a throne. God doesn't literally have eyes. He doesn't literally have a nose. He doesn't literally have a mouth. Those are just things to help us to understand that God can see, God can smell, God can speak, God can hear, but he doesn't have these physical aspects that men have on earth. Because the image of God is not speaking of the actual physicality of God. The image of God is speaking of the spiritual nature, the spiritual content of God that God has put within man. So what does that mean, King of Kings, Lord of Lords? It represents his authority. In Bible times, leg strength represented how strong you are as a man. So it is almost like saying there's a passage in the Old Testament where God says he takes no pleasure in the leg strength of a man, but in this he takes delight in a man who fears him and trembles at his word. So God doesn't. So it's like saying today, God takes no pleasure in the bench press of a man. God takes no pleasure in the deadlift of a man. Those are expressions we use today. He said in the leg strength of a man, because back then, your leg strength, perhaps they did squats or whatever they did, but he takes no pleasure in that, right? So the leg strength represented authority. Why am I speaking about leg strength? If Christ has King of Kings, Lord of Lords written on his thigh, his leg strength represents that he is strong. The King of Kings, Lord of Lords written on his thigh is an expression of his authority, his power. It is not literally written on his thigh. So he has no tattoos. Again, in the Old Testament, God says you must not wear tattoos. So Christ does not have a tattoo. It is also no different from when the Bible says that we should have God's law tattooed on our hearts. We should have it engraved on our hearts. God is not literally telling us to go and have a tattoo on our heart. It is the same as when it says that Christ has a tattoo on, or Lord of Lords, King of Kings written on his thigh. We have God's law written on our hearts, but it's not literally written on our hearts. King of Kings, Lord of Lords is not literally written on Christ's thigh. It's an expression. So yes, you can make the argument that we are not bound by the Old Testament, and so tattoos, you can have a tattoo. Fine. You could get a tattoo based on that argument, because even the Ten Commandments, I made a video on this, that the Ten Commandments is really the only commands that are times indefinite, not the Mosaic law. Understand that there are two laws. There's the Old Testament, which is the Mosaic law, the Torah, and then there's the Ten Commandments. There is a difference between the two. Now, the Ten Commandments is part of the Mosaic law, but the Mosaic law is not part of the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are sanctified. They are set apart. They are holy, apart from the Mosaic law. If the Ten Commandments were not holy or set apart or sanctified, then God would not have set them apart and put them on two tablet stones, making them separate from the others. If no law was more important than the other, then God would not have set apart the Ten Commandments as if they are better than the other commandments, because they are better than the other commandments. That's why he set them apart. So you must have no other gods before my face. You must not steal. You must not bear false witness. You must honor your father and your mother. You must not take up the name of your God in a worthless way. Right? These honor the Sabbath. Keep it holy. Sanctify the Sabbath. These are part of the Ten Commandments. These are to be obeyed and obliged by to times indefinite. That's why God's own finger wrote them down on stone tablets. And so you could say that the whole portion of the Mosaic law is fulfilled by Christ. So we don't have to sacrifice anymore. We don't stone adulterers, right? We don't follow the Old Testament. The Ten Commandments, though, are to times indefinite. It applies even till today. So, but since the Ten Commandments are more sanctified and more holy and more important than the Mosaic law, anything that is not written in the Ten Commandments is not so necessary for us to oblige by. So, yes, God did say, do not have tattoos, but it is not part of the Ten Commandments. If that was so important to not have tattoos, God would have put that on the Ten Commandments, but he didn't. Why did he leave it out? Like I said, if all the laws are as important as the others, then God would not have put one here and then the other one leave it out. So murdering someone is more important to not murder someone than it is to have a tattoo on your body, basically. So God said you must not murder, but he didn't find it necessary to put you must not have tattoos in the Ten Commandments. But the fact that he mentioned that you must not have tattoo in the first place tells you that, okay, it's not as important, but let's see. If you will obey me in what is little and what is least, you will obey me in what is most. Right? He who is faithful in what is least and what is the little things will be faithful in what is greater things. So yes, having a tattoo, you can say, is a little thing. It's not so important. You can have a tattoo. It's not so important. It's not necessarily life and death. You can say that. But to kill someone, right, that's more of a heavy sin. And then there is also, they made comments about that if we shouldn't have tattoos, and that means that we shouldn't shave our beards too, right? Because the Bible says in Leviticus 19:27, it says we shouldn't shave our beards. But it doesn't say we shouldn't shave our beards. That's not what it says. If God wanted to tell us that we shouldn't shave our beards, there's an easier way of saying it. Just say we shouldn't shave our beards. But the way he says it is not, there is more to it than just you should not shave your beards. He says, do not round off your heads. You see, if a lot of you guys are into martial arts movies, you will notice that the Asians, the Chinese specifically, they have this culture of leaving hair on the top of their head. And the rest of it will be bald. And sometimes they will have like a ponytail here. That comes from paganism, okay? A lot of the Old Testament laws were written in application to what the pagans did, and God was telling his people to be separate from the pagans and to not do the customs of the pagans. So we won't understand the significance of why God says do not round off the corners of your head today. We won't understand that because we're not living in it. Mind you, this was in Mosaic times, people. There was a reason why God gave that command. And unless you live then, you wouldn't really understand it. So someone rounding off the corners of their head today is not the same thing as people doing it back then, because the culture back then, they knew what it represented. So if someone literally, not literally, but if someone intentionally did it, they knew why they were doing it. And everyone in the community of Israel would see and acquaint that with something that was pagan. And God was saying, you must not do that. So even if you want to use that to say you shouldn't be bald, you're taking it completely out of context, because you can be bald. He's saying, he didn't say don't be bald. He didn't say that. He said, do not round off the corners of your head. That's very different from saying, do not shave your head. And then when it comes to the beard, in the same verse, he says, do not mar or destroy or cut the edges of the beard. That is very different from saying, do not shave, right? Or do not shave your beard. So again, we don't understand the significance of why God is saying, do not cut the corners of the beard. But you understand too that this is in context with the pagans of that time. So I guess it'll be something like saying today, I can't think of something to use as an example, but the best that I can come up with right now is like, it's almost like God was to say to people today, if he had a command for people today, he would say, none of your children and none of your men and none of your daughters and none of your women, none of you should say, ho, 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 I have a present for you, right? None of you should say, ho, 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 I have a present for you. Because what is that an acquaintance with? Santa Claus. Because you do know Santa Claus is a false god who has been made to represent God. He knows you've been a good person. He knows you've been naughty. He knows what you've been doing. He has eyes everywhere. He knows every little kid, what all their deeds. He knows if they've been good. You understand that it's pagan. So if God was to say, none of your children or none of you should say, ho, 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 I have a present for you, right? In any other generation, you would say, what's the point of that? Well, hey, it says, do not say ho, ho, ho. But notice that there's nothing in itself, there's nothing wrong with saying ho, 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 right? I have a present for you. But because of what it's acquainted with in our age, day and age, if you say that, every child would know this is about, Santa Claus. And Jehovah is a very jealous God. So it is like the same principle.
So in conclusion, yes, tattoos, the eating of pork, the making of cuts on top of our head for the dead, the marring the edges of the beard, the rounding off the top of the head. All these prohibitions that were given by God in the Old Testament are not necessary for us to listen to today, because they were meant for the nation of Israel for that time period, for certain specific reasons that were in application to them because of where they were living and the time period that they were living in. But there is always wisdom in looking into why God gave certain commands and certain prohibitions. It's true that the first century Christians mentioned that they add no further burden to us that is part of the law, apart from these necessary things, which were namely to keep abstaining from blood, to keep abstaining from food sacrificed to idols, and food strangled, which basically means food that were not bled properly, right? And that if we follow these things, then good health to us, right? So that in itself is also telling us that, okay, so these other parts of the law, the Old Testament, you don't have to keep following. But there is wisdom in listening to the little things of God. So why would God say, do not make cuts upon your skins? Right? Why would God say, do not eat pork? Right? Why would God say, do not put tattoos on your body? Perhaps there is a health benefit to these things. But even if, well, the pork, obviously there's health benefit to not eating pork, obviously. But when it comes to things such as like tattoos, where we don't see the obvious side effects to it, there is still wisdom in listening to the little things of God. Even though it is not a big thing, there is still wisdom in listening to the little things of God. So me personally, I will still not get tattoos, ever. I will not eat pork. So I would much rather listen to the little things of God, because if I am disciplined in what is the little things, then I will definitely be even more disciplined in the greater parts of the law. And all I can basically do is just recommend the same for you guys. But I can't say that you have to, do what I'm doing, because like Paul said, we cannot judge someone who is eating pork. Right, we can't, because if I put it upon myself to not eat pork, I can't judge my fellow man for eating pork. If I put it upon myself to not get a tattoo, I can't oblige my fellow man to not get a tattoo. But all I can basically do is just advise, and that's that. So that's the conclusion.